Hey everyone, welcome to the show where we discuss current legal events and legal hot topics from the perspective of a seasoned attorney such as myself. And today we'll be discussing Congress and Chaos, Part 2. And for this second segment, we're going to be discussing why and how democracy requires substance over form. So we're going to talk a little bit about what it means when we say substance over form, and then what does it look like when substance is being placed over form in our democratic institutions. And then why is it so important? And with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. If you make conclusory statements, then that's not substance. So when you focus on form, you're kind of going through the motions, but you don't have any substance. So, for example, that's kind of how we got to the point where the House of Representatives couldn't elect a speaker, because the form says, hey, you have to elect a speaker, but the substance wasn't right. Because if the substance was right, then a speaker would have been elected. And so now we're going to look at some of the first rules and laws that they have sought to enact, or I should say introduce. And that might shed some light on where we have gone awry relating to substance. We'll see. I think that it does. So first, one of the first things I should say that the House does once it has been convened is to what we say promulgate, lawyers fancy words for institute rules. These are the rules that the Congress is going to work from. It's creating a framework, because you need to have a uniform framework to make sure that everybody's playing by the same set of rules. Okay? So the House rules for the 118th Congress, which is this current Congress, according to me, focus on form over substance. And this is why I think that. So there's been a few changes relating to the rules. And most of these changes that I'm pointing out here below, are changes that relate to spending. Okay, so first it says the new rules bar, in quote, the net effect of increased mandatory spending. 2, the new rules bar amendment to general appropriation bills that would propose, in quote, a net increase in the level of budget authority in the bill. So what is an appropriation bill? An appropriation bill is a bill, or what is a law, because laws are created by introducing bills, okay? So an appropriation bill is a law that proposes spending. And so here we have Congress saying that any general appropriation bill cannot propose a net increase in the level of budgetary authority, which means you can't propose to increase spending, in a nutshell. Okay, so then number 3, it says the rules for this 118th Congress limits increases in direct spending and reconciliation initiatives. So sometimes we need to reconcile spending with how much money has been allotted, or whatever the case may be. And so again, we're going to see that the new rule says that you cannot increase direct spending in reconciliation initiatives. Number 4, the new rules limit increases in net direct spending for budget reconciliation. So net direct spending is a little bit different, but again, we get the gist of it, right? No increase in spending. The new rules for this new Congress and this is for the House of Representatives, increase the minimum number of representatives needed to pass a resolution if the law wants to increase the federal income tax rate. So my question on that one is, when was the last time we increased the federal income tax rate for individual people? Now, we have increased the income tax rate for corporations. I have seen that. But corporations don't vote. Individual people do. The will of the people is what they're supposed to be serving. So I guess my question is, when was the last time there was an increase in the federal income tax rate for individual people. And again, I would also say working class people, right? Because most people are working class people. If we want to look at the 1%, those are people who are extremely wealthy. But working class, ordinary people, that's typically what I refer to when I say the will of the people. And that's who Congress is supposed to be working on behalf of. Again, just food for thought. But so when I say form over substance, what we see is the form that's being focused on is no increase in spending. But it's elevating form over substance because we haven't looked at whether an increase in spending might actually be necessary under some certain circumstances. And so again, and this is kind of going back to what I was saying about just having a policy stance of always reducing taxes, but not taking into account the circumstances. Because if you just always reduce taxes, you're going to almost always simply increase the deficit. That's form over substance. And that might be why we have a little bit of dysfunction, a little bit of chaos. Because obviously there's people who understand that you need to have substance over form. And so when we see things not working properly, it might be because you have a majority that is saying, hey, we need substance, that is fighting a minority that's kind of putting form over substance. It's possible. It may not be the case, but it certainly could be the case. Then we have a question here, and I'm not going to answer this question. We're just going to ask the question. But my question is, if we look at the House rules and the emphasis that the House rules place on limiting spending increases, but then we also look at their platform, the Republican Party platforms, one can see that their platform goals appear to be a little bit disconnected from their policies and whether this serves the people. So let's just go back and look very quickly at the platform so we can put this back in perspective. So we see curb wasteful government spending. Okay. See, again, if you look at this from a simplistic viewpoint, you can say, oh, well, they limited spending. But you can't look at it from a simplistic standpoint because it's not a simple matter. If you just look at everything, okay, they reduced taxes, but everything has to be reconciled. Hence the word reconciliation in the rules. If you just implement a policy without looking at its impact or substance, then you are making policy decisions, but they're not necessarily going to have the impact that you want them to have. Okay? So curbing wasteful government spending, then you see in their rules, they say, okay, don't increase spending. All that says is that they're not increasing spending. It does not make any distinction between substantive government spending and wasteful government spending, and that is problematic. Okay, so now looking at the bills, or these are the prospective laws that have been introduced for the week of January 9th, 2023. And so we want to look at how these rules relate to the party's policy goals, which is the platform. And so first we'll look at the Family and Small Business Taxpayer Protection Act. And I've also cited the law, or the bill number. That's what we would refer to as the bill number. And that is HR 23. Okay. Family and Small Business Taxpayer Protection Act. And again, this relates, you can take a closer look at it, but it relates to, right off the bat, cutting taxes. And I can't stress it enough, you can't always just cut taxes as a policy goal, because you have to take into consideration the deficit and what do we need to run the government? What type of appropriations and funding do we need to actually run the government and run it efficiently? If you just say we want to reduce taxes and we don't want to spend any money, that focuses on form without looking at the substance of how much does it take to actually do what we need to do. That's substance. Then we see next, establishing Select Committee on Weaponization of the Federal Government as a select investigative committee of the Judiciary. And that is the name of that particular bill. I did not make that up. Just want to be clear about that. And that is House Resolution 11. And now that tends to align with the platform goal of holding Washington accountable, which was, remember, very vague. And this name is still the name of this House Resolution 11 is vague. So the question becomes, what is meant by weaponization of the federal government? This is all very vague. But again, as far as this, typically the first bills that are introduced are the bills that, well, it was seen will be the bills and policies that are most important. And this particular one kind of stands out to me because it's really focusing more on what individual members of Congress may be feeling or what they may want, but it's not really focusing on the will of the people, because the federal government is not being weaponized against the people. I digress. I can't really say much more about this. Number 3, Protecting America's Strategic Petroleum Reserve from China Act, which is House Resolution number 12. And I don't know, I can't say much about that. I do know that the United States does export petroleum to China. I did not see a lot of imports of petroleum from China to the United States. So again, my question becomes, how does this serve the will of the people? Because if we wanted to focus on petroleum, aka gasoline, the focus might be on how you might reduce the price for the people. But that's neither here nor there. That's just a thought. Next item, Prosecutors Need to Prosecute Act. Again, how is that really serving the will of the people, or how the government functions more democratically and more efficiently? The reason why this is a little bit disconcerting as a lawyer is because, one, prosecutors have always had what is called prosecutorial discretion, which means laws exist and then prosecutors who have the skill, law degrees, and experience to make a determination should a person be prosecuted under this particular law. This has a similar defect as it relates to the Advanced Appearance Bill of Rights bill, because it's, again, you have politicians replacing their thoughts and their beliefs and their opinions over the opinions of the professionals that are skilled in this area. For example, with the Parents' Bill of Rights, it would be educators. And with this Prosecutors Need to Prosecute Act, it would be prosecutors. And so again, if we're starting to see an underlying theme here, and that underlying theme is overstepping of boundaries. People stepping into realms that they are not equipped to deal with. We have politicians telling prosecutors how to prosecute, politicians telling educators how to educate, politicians telling healthcare workers how to provide health care. Then we get this standoff in our House of Representatives where we have a minority faction in our House of Representatives telling the majority how to legislate. Might that be where that came from? This is what we attorneys refer to as a slippery slope. It's a slippery slope argument because there's certain things that once you start to move in that direction, it's like um, it's like if you're at the top of the hill and the hill is icy. If you step on the ice at the top of the hill, you will slide all the way to the bottom. Once you start to go outside the boundaries of what is normal and what is uniform, you have a slippery slope because it becomes how far can you go? And that's really all this is. It's a slippery slope, and we just keep sliding and sliding and sliding. And we have slid so far that our House of Representatives was not able to elect a speaker because some people were on the bottom of the slope and some people are still at the top of the slope within the House. But we can look at these laws and some of the things that are happening in our legal climate and see that as a whole, our legal climate is on the slope as a whole. So let's look at the next one. Expressing support for the nation's law enforcement agencies and condemning any efforts to defund or dismantle law enforcement agencies. And so this one is a little bit interesting to me because when I read a law as a lawyer, the first thing I always think is, why do we need that? Because has there been any concerted effort to defund or dismantle law enforcement agencies? And the answer is no. Now, can you find, if you go searching, can you find one state or one town or one village or one municipality in this whole country that might have entertained a thought to disfund or dismantle a law enforcement agency? Yes, you might be able to find that. However, when we are running an entire country and we are enacting legislation to assist in that endeavor, we are supposed to take into consideration what is called a cost-benefit analysis. And if there is only one small village, municipality, city, town, county, whatever it may be, not even a whole state, and keep in mind there's 51 states. So even if there was one state that said, hey, the whole state said they were going to dismantle their law enforcement agencies, which we all know that there's no state that has done this. But even if there was one state that did that, out of all the rest of the 51 states, this is how we engage in a cost-benefit analysis. So we take that one state and we divide it by the 51 states, and we just determine what percentage of our overall subset are we looking at. And we see that 1 divided by 51 is 0.01%. It's 0.019. So that's like 1%. So if you have something that's happening in 1% of the population, what is the benefit to the entire population of you passing that law? That's what a cost-benefit analysis is. Because if there's no benefit, then the cost isn't justified. What is the cost of condemning these efforts? And does that cost outweigh the benefit? I'm going to say that it's likely yes. The answer to that question is likely yes, because only about 1%, less than 1%, because it's not even a whole state, you might be able to find a handful of municipalities. So we've got less than 1% of an impact here, but we've got an excessive contribution of time, energy, and effort to it, which is a waste of resources, which honestly is the definition of wasteful government spending. And that's what I mean by the platform and the laws. They don't jive. So let's just go ahead and look at the next one. Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. What comes to mind immediately is that it seems like the people have spoken on this whole issue of abortion, yet we see another abortion bill. And I digress on that point right then and there. Next point, expressing the sense of Congress condemning the recent attacks on pro-life facilities, groups, and churches. And I will double down on my sentiment, which is the people have spoken on this issue, yet we see more time, energy of our legislature, who is supposed to be working on our behalf, working on something that the people have said, hey, we're good on this right now. And then, so the next point, Strategic Production Response Act. When it comes to laws and bills, your title should always give you some type of hint as to what it's about. And this one doesn't do that. And that's really another point why I did this, which is to kind of tell you that we've got form over substance. Because substantively, we should be able to see, we don't know what this substance is at all. We actually have to open it up, start reading and looking into it to get any type of clue, honestly, but that's neither here nor there. Next item, Border Safety and Security Act of 2023. And again, the same thing that I said relating to the platform. One, was the cost benefit analysis justified, and is this something that is relevant in this particular, under the circumstances that are prevailing in our country right now, when we have more jobs than we have individuals to work those jobs. So we have a labor shortage. And one way that you can solve a labor shortage is you can either, as we've already mentioned, you can either reduce jobs or you can increase the number of people available to fill those jobs. And one such way that you can do that is through immigration. Because if nobody in the country wants those jobs, or those are not ideal jobs because they're going unfilled, some jobs are empty because people don't want those jobs. So maybe we should figure out how to fill those positions instead of start cutting back jobs that people actually want, by the way. Because if you cut certain jobs, people who hold, high level jobs are not going to go and work at the dollar store. So are we shooting ourselves in the foot? Just food for thought. The next law is called Illegal Alien NICS Alert Act. And again, I'm not going to say any more about immigration because I've made my point clear. And then lastly, we have no taxpayer funding for abortion and abortion insurance full disclosure. Okay, I'm going to revisit this abortion issue again. One, I'm going to simply say again, the will of the people has been expressed that we are kind of over the whole limiting abortion any further than has already been done. It appears, if you look at the news and you look at how people are voting in some of the most conservative voter districts, we're over it. Yet and still, there's 3 bills introduced the very first week of Congress that the House of Representatives are convened relating to abortion. That's not the will of the people. That's not serving the will of the people. That's serving their own interests. And again, might that be why we had some dysfunction and chaos in trying to elect a speaker and even convene Congress in the first place? I would submit that it might be. But what's even more problematic is when we look at the cost-benefit analysis of this particular bill, there already is no taxpayer funding for abortion. It's called the 1977 Hyde Amendment, which is a law that already exists and has been on the books since 1977. So this law is concerning from the aspect that this law is up for consideration, and it is duplicative of a law that already exists and has to exist for the last almost 50 years. That's wasteful. That's a waste of government time, energy, effort, and resources, which is wasteful spending. See, this is what I mean by form over substance. If you think that wasteful spending is just about the purse strings, then you're 100% mistaken. That's a simplistic view. Wasteful spending is spending time, energy, and money on laws that have already been established and already exist. And so that brings me to my last question relating to form over substance, which is, or I should say, when we see bills being introduced, and even when we see legislation being enacted, which means the bill is actually passes. And if you're interested in how bills are passed, then go ahead and leave a comment below. And, if there's enough interest, then I can discuss how legislation is passed. And I'm very concerned about some of the legislation, because what we're seeing is while we have a party that says they want to focus on tradition and history, for example, the Supreme Court is on this whole history and tradition kick, but the legislature is doing the opposite, which is chaos, dysfunction. Our legal system can't really thrive when we got one portion doing one thing, this portion doing another, and then we have, which are kind of like factions, and then we have mainstream, which is saying, hey, none of this is normal. None of this is within the realm of what we traditionally do and how we traditionally function. Anyone who's familiar with the state of our legal climate, it really probably wasn't all that surprising that the House of Representatives was not able to elect a speaker, because the same dysfunction that has been manifesting in the rest of the legal climate simply arose in the legislature. So again, just keep that in mind. Keep in mind, what purpose does legislation serve towards, one, a functional democracy versus a dysfunctional democracy? And I will say a dysfunctional democracy puts form over substance. And if you watch my episode on different types of governments, and I talked about democracy versus authoritarian types of government, in an authoritarian type of government, you will see the elevation of form over substance. So just keep that in mind. And that might be one reason why learned individuals, people who are learned in the law and in democratic institutions are saying, hey, our democracy is in danger, because you see the manifestation of undemocratic principles in places where they shouldn't be. So that concludes our segment on Congress and chaos. And this was part 2, where we discussed why democracy requires substance over form. And I hope you found it interesting and enlightening. And if so, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that you can be notified of future episodes. And with that, I will see you in our next episode.